You posed as a nurse to take my baby. Clorinda, are you out of your goddamn mind? She didn't flinch, just stood there, smug, with her arms crossed in the middle of my living room, like she owned the floorboards beneath her shoes. The laminated badge around her neck, Clorinda Veller, President, Marrow Glen, HOA, gleamed in the glow of my hallway sensor. This is a community action, she said, chin lifted. The board has serious concerns about the child's emotional safety. You're unstable, Mr. Kelm. Unstable? She hadn't even noticed the small red diode blinking above the nursery door. I tilted my head, slow. That sensor still pings back to my private off-grid node. And that feed? I nodded to the corner camera. It's been live for 40 seconds. Police Chief Lenvar Oren already has eyes on you. That wiped the grin off her face. They thought I was just another paranoid single father clinging to old tech. That's exactly what I needed them to think. If you care about your home, your kids, or just watching an HOA president get wrecked on camera, hit subscribe now. Because this story ends in a way Clorinda never saw coming. I'm Draven Kelm. Before my daughter was born, I led threat architecture at the Cyber Resilience Office for the state. Before that, digital counter intel for 13 years. Before that, doesn't matter. What matters is this. I buried my wife 7 hours after she gave birth. Oriel came into this world early, underweight, and alone. So I built our home like a fortress, not with weapons, systems. My baby monitor syncs to a rotating offline cluster. Every camera node is fiber isolated. The crib's base has a pressure-sensitive mat with a fail-safe burst ping if the weight ever changes without authorization. That's not overkill. That's what grief turns into when you've got a degree in countermeasures and a daughter whose cries sound too much like alarms. They called my systems paranoid. Clorinda called them aesthetic pollution. But I wasn't protecting my property. I was protecting the last piece of my wife. The pendulum mobile above Oriel's crib was Amira's final project. She made it from river stones and copper wire in her last trimester, hoping the sound would remind our daughter of heartbeat rhythms. I hung it up alone after Amira passed. It swings in silent arcs above Oriel every night. Clorinda called it foreign material visible from window. Violation notice, Naujajams Ozer 104. But the real threat started when they told me my surveillance system disrupted community signal harmony. They gave me a week to shut it down or face fines. I declined. The fines increased. Then came the warnings. Then a notice suggesting that infant welfare might be reviewed by the board due to technology-induced isolation. That's not a policy. That's a setup. Clorinda's not stupid. She's surgical. She used her position to mask harassment behind HOA language. And tonight, she took it a step further. She faked a power outage, had someone in medical scrubs enter through a side door. That woman didn't knock. She didn't call. She headed straight for the nursery, clipboard in one hand, crib in the other. She would have made it out too. But she didn't know I'd hardwired the nursery's sensor to trip if the pendulum mobile ever stopped moving mid-cycle. And when that baby snatcher reached in, her presence disrupted the airflow. The mobile stilled, the sensor fired, and in real time, the feed hit Oren's secure stream. You don't survive federal cyber warfare contracts without learning where to put your traps. Now Clorinda stood in my entryway, eyes darting between the blinking light and the nursery door where that woman had just been caught on live camera lifting Oriel. She still didn't know the cops were already on their way. She still didn't realize Marston, her own HOA secretary, had tipped me off an hour earlier. She thought I was just another widower with a camera obsession. That's fine, because now she's standing in a federal alert zone, caught red-handed, thinking this is just another HOA enforcement visit. But the second that mobile stopped swinging, she wasn't a president anymore. She was a criminal. Clorinda's voice still echoed in my hallway when the backup generator kicked in. A low hum vibrated through the walls as my internal systems reset and the house came back to life. Lights flickering to full strength, hallway monitors blinking green. She spun around like she'd been caught shoplifting, then plastered on that HOA smile again, the one that never quite reached her eyes. I'll inform the board you've chosen non-compliance. There may be further consequences, Mr. Kelm. She said it like I'd missed a payment on lawn maintenance, not like she'd just staged an illegal entry into my home. She backed out onto my porch, her knockoff flats leaving no sound on the stone. But I didn't move until the security door sealed behind her with a hiss, until the timer on my screen confirmed the external breach was over. Only then did I pick up my daughter. Oriel was safe. Her cheek rested against my shoulder, her soft little hand curling into the fabric of my shirt. She didn't cry. She never did after power cuts. She'd gotten used to the hum of the generator, like most kids get used to lullabies. It was white noise to her. To me, it was war drums. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the nursery chair, the mobile spinning slowly above us, and I thought about every family that hadn't known how far the board would go. Every parent who accepted a citation and shut up. Every widow or single mom who didn't have firewalls or server nodes or friends in law enforcement. This neighborhood, Marrow Glen, was a designed community, modern, secure, pristine on paper. But beneath that surface was a layer of rot. Clorinda controlled the board like it was a small regime, not by overt force, but through fear. HOA newsletters were filled with public shaming. Yard citations were posted in common areas. Concern forms could be submitted anonymously, and they rarely went unanswered, especially if you were new, especially if you didn't play nice. The community's smiling teeth were bared at anyone who questioned how tightly they bit down. The first violation I got was about the mobile, said it was unsightly to passing drivers, as if a window-facing crib ornament made of copper and stone could offend anyone. The second, my surveillance network, a full citation package, page after page about network congestion, unsanctioned frequencies, and electromagnetic conflicts. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so calculated. They tried to get me to use their approved vendor for in-home systems, some garbage-tier tech company called Ready a Guard that Clorinda's cousin just happened to work for. I refused. That's when the child safety emails started. But it wasn't just me. The Daniels down on Sycamore were forced to cut down a 40-year-old tree because Clorinda said its shadow pattern encouraged mold growth. The Youngs had their toddler's swing removed from their front porch, violated visual rhythm, whatever that meant. This HOA wasn't about harmony. It was about control, about power disguised as preference. I kept thinking about how she had stood in my house tonight like she was inspecting property, not trespassing, like she'd rehearsed the scene in her head already, narrated it in her own version of events. She wasn't nervous. She expected no pushback. She believed herself untouchable. And maybe she had been, until now. I spent the rest of the night reviewing my logs, not just the incident feed, the whole month, access pings, flag network anomalies. I cross-referenced everything, door sensors, keystroke echoes, thermal cams. Patterns emerged. Someone had tried this before, twice, small interruptions. Deliberate motion, blur near the kitchen cabinet sensors. Once in the backyard, the gate had opened at 3:12 a.m., but the HOA log never showed an inspection request. They'd been testing me, poking at my defenses like burglars pushing on windows. Clorinda hadn't expected them to hold, and when they did, she brought a fake nurse and tried to force the door open in broad daylight. I stared at the footage again. The woman in scrubs never hesitated. She didn't even look around. She knew where the nursery was, knew the layout, which meant someone gave it to her. And I already had a name, because one person on the HOA board had access to the architectural records of my home, and he hadn't met my eyes once since the last meeting. Marston Krayla, the secretary with a shaking pen, the former EMT who'd mumbled something about emergency procedures during our last conversation. He knew something, and I was going to find out what. Marston didn't show up to the emergency board meeting the next morning. I watched the HOA's group feed stream from my screen, while Oriel napped in the carrier across my chest. Clorinda sat at the head of the table in the HOA pavilion, flanked by the same two loyalists she always leaned on, Jeff Withrow and Lydia Marn. Both of them nodded like bobbleheads while she recited legal-sounding drivel about shared digital security protocols and corrective discretion under Section 12G. The seat labeled Secretary, Marston Creeley, remained empty. I didn't expect him to show his face, not after last night, not after what I saw in the access logs. But I needed him to, because he hadn't just signed off on the inspection clearance that let Clorinda's contractor through the outer gate. He'd also manually overridden the biometric sensor on the side entry 2 nights ago. That override had been buried in the audit trail, but I knew how to find shadows in code. The only reason he'd be that sloppy? Guilt. I waited 2 more days before knocking on his door. He lived in the northeast corner of the neighborhood, the oldest section of Marrow Glen. The houses weren't copy-paste gray like the rest of the community. They had texture, age, some dignity. Marston's porch was lined with potted plants half-tended, and a wind chime hung near the window, unmoving in the stale air. He opened the door in a wrinkled flannel and khakis with a faint coffee stain. He didn't say anything when he saw me, just stared. "Let me in," I said, "or tell me to leave and explain to the cops why your name shows up on every override log tied to the break-in attempt." He stepped aside, didn't protest. Inside, his living room was dim. Heavy curtains blocked the afternoon sun, and the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon. A framed photo sat on the mantel, a little boy with sun-bleached hair grinning in a backyard sprinkler. "I'm not here to get you arrested," I said, "but you need to talk to me before she burns this whole neighborhood down." Marston sat on the edge of the couch like the cushions were on fire. He rubbed his palms together, eyes focused on a crack in the floor tile. "I didn't know what she was planning, not at first. You still gave someone access to my house. You signed off on it." His jaw clenched. "She said it was a wellness audit, said the board passed it. I just had to stamp the clearance. I didn't think she'd send someone without a license." I leaned forward. "Didn't think or didn't want to think." He flinched. "My son died in a state custody dispute 6 years ago," he said quietly. "One bad report, one anonymous tip. His mom's new boyfriend didn't like me. I lost visitation. Then I lost him completely. A seizure while he was sleeping. I wasn't even notified until 2 days after the funeral." His hands trembled as he spoke, but he didn't stop. "I know what it feels like to be stripped of your right to protect your child. So when Clorinda started talking about interventions, I thought maybe she was doing what someone should have done for me. I didn't know she'd fake credentials." I studied him for a moment. Marston wasn't evil. He was broken, manipulated, but that didn't make him harmless. "Clorinda has a pattern," I said. "She doesn't just violate policy, she creates fake ones and buries them in the code. You've signed off on things you didn't even read, haven't you?" He looked away. I didn't need a confession. I needed a name, a file, a digital trail. "Then help me," I said. "Give me her internal board comms, the HOA vote logs, her backdated policies. If we're going to stop her, we need something an outside authority can act on." He hesitated. "She's going to keep pushing," I added. "And next time, it won't be a fake nurse. It'll be child services, or worse, someone without a camera watching." Marston stood, walked to a drawer near the desk, pulled out a small flash drive, and placed it in my hand. "It's everything from the last 6 months," he said. "Meeting minutes, financials, policy drafts. You'll find her there." I nodded, pocketed the drive, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, I glanced back. "You're not the only one who lost someone," I said, "but you still have a choice what kind of man you are." The door clicked shut behind me. I didn't feel relief. I felt the clock ticking. The envelope was waiting on my doorstep the next morning, thick, glossy, and sealed in the HOA's signature maroon sticker. No postmark, no delivery time stamp. Just Clorinda's crooked empire printed across the top. Marrow Glen Preservation Committee. Formal enforcement notification. Inside, 6 printed pages slid out. The first was a final violation summary. The second was a digital disruption citation. The third and newest edition was something called a community protection assessment. It didn't even pretend to be subtle anymore. Due to continued non-compliance with unified tech infrastructure standards and suspected behavioral instability following a spousal death event, it read, "Marrow Glen HOA has resolved to initiate emergency welfare oversight under Clause 14D, subject to discretionary action by board leadership." Discretionary action. She meant she was going to try again. And this time, she wasn't hiding behind fake wellness visits. She was building a paper trail, a fake one, but a trail nonetheless. She wanted to make me look unstable, unfit. She was trying to get ahead of whatever exposure I might have planned. She knew I'd push back after last night, and she was already setting up her counterstrike. It was Clorinda at her most dangerous. I placed the envelope beside Oriel's bassinet. She stirred under the blanket, one tiny fist poking out from the folds. I watched the mobile spin slowly. Overhead, copper wires catching the light. My wife's touch lived in every loop of that spiral. I wouldn't let them erase it. Not with citations, not with bureaucratic fiction. So I did what I was trained to do. I turned on every system. There's a reason my surveillance grid doesn't run through cloud apps or smart home hubs. Everything routes through my own infrastructure, air-gapped when I need it, mirrored when I don't. I had data logs Clorinda didn't even know existed. Thermal overlays, packet collisions, anomalous node crossings. She could lie all she wanted. The truth lived in my machines, and so did her fingerprints. I traced the override Marston had triggered during the blackout test 2 nights ago. Then I followed it backward, through the HOA panel logs, the access timestamps, all the way to the root device that issued the original override signal. The chain terminated in a known board device, Clorinda's. She hadn't used her office tablet. She'd used a personal mobile device previously registered during an HOA tech support call 5 months earlier. She must have forgotten it was tied to her ID token. That's what happens when tyrants don't understand their own systems. I captured the data, watermarked it, then stored it in 3 locations. One on a cold drive, one on a mirrored ghost server, one routed directly to a secure backup node off-site. That wasn't enough. I needed to know who else she'd targeted, who else might have signed something under pressure. So I pulled her Community Protection Assessment document apart. It was a Frankenstein of jargon, fragments of older HOA language twisted into something new. Clause 14D didn't exist 6 weeks ago. I checked the revision log. The document metadata had been overwritten, but not correctly. I decrypted the temp files and found the first author entry, not Clorinda. Lydia Marn, one of her bobbleheads. She'd been the one to file the policy draft, using a standard policy template, then modifying the text on her work computer. She forgot to strip the metadata, classic amateur mistake. I logged the timestamp and linked it to the last board vote summary. Clause 14D passed with a 3-by-1 vote. Marston hadn't attended that session. He hadn't even known it passed. This was a stacked deck, a policy created from nothing, drafted by a puppet, passed by ghost voters. And now they were waving it around like it gave them the right to remove my child from my home. It wasn't a policy. It was a blueprint for sanctioned invasion. Oriel let out a small whimper, and I turned from the screen. Her eyes fluttered open, lashes dark against her cheeks. She didn't cry. She just blinked, looking for something familiar. I walked over, placed a hand on her back. "This ends now," I whispered. They thought they were tightening the noose, but I'd just found the loose thread in their entire operation, and I was going to pull until it unraveled. The knock came just after, 9 p.m., not on the front door, on the side gate. The same gate Clorinda's contractor used to try and steal Oriel. I hadn't heard anyone approach, but the vibration sensor pinged 3 seconds before the knock. Whoever it was didn't trigger the motion lights. They knew where to walk, knew the blind spot. Except I didn't have any blind spots. I watched from my screen as a figure shifted just behind the gate's edge. Hoodie, slouched posture, head down. The system flagged a heat signature, 98.3 human. Familiar profile. I tapped the override and buzzed it open. Marston stepped inside like he expected to be yelled at. His hands were in his pockets, shoulders bunched up near his ears. He didn't say anything until I closed the gate behind him. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered, "but I saw something today." We moved inside. Oriel was asleep, the house dim and silent, except for the rhythmic spin of the mobile above her crib. Marston glanced toward the nursery but didn't approach. He sat stiffly at my kitchen counter, eyes flicking over every corner like he was afraid Clorinda would burst through the wall. "She's rewriting the record," he said. "The board logs, the committee meeting minutes." She scrubbed the vote tally from the Clause 14D file, replaced it with one that looks legit. I didn't respond. I'd already seen the tampered timestamp, the metadata mismatch, the insertions that didn't line up with previous meeting formatting. "She's trying to bury it before the county looks too closely," he continued. "After last week's call to the HOA legal advisory line, someone must have flagged her. Now she's panicking. She pulled Jeff and Lydia into a private session this morning. I wasn't invited." "She's trying to patch the paper trail," I said. Marston nodded. She told Lydia to claim you'd threatened her. My pulse slowed. Not quickened, slowed. The kind of stillness that settles when you realize someone's pushed too far. That won't work, I said. Not anymore. Marston reached into his coat and pulled out another drive. No label, no case. Just metal and static. This is her tablet sync archive, he said. I shouldn't have it, but I copied the drive during last year's hurricane drill. She left her tablet plugged into the pavilion's uplink without logging out. Paranoid as she is, she never knew the auto-sync pulled her personal files too. He set the drive on the counter and pushed it toward me like it was radioactive. She's got 3 policies on there that never went through a vote. One's about private inspections, one's about child wellness actions under emergency clause review. The last is, he hesitated. It's a draft of a residency forfeiture clause. She wants the power to evict homeowners for persistent moral hazard. I picked up the drive and turned it over in my hand. What does she have on you? I asked. Marston swallowed. A record from when I had to resuscitate my son. I panicked, used expired meds. It didn't matter in the end, but the report doesn't look good. She pulled it from the state EMT disciplinary archive. I don't know how. I stared at him. You realize this is a criminal operation now. She's abusing private data, falsifying legal documents, staging entry under false authority. I know. And you're just now stepping forward? His eyes welled but didn't break. I've been complicit. I won't pretend I haven't, but I'm trying to fix it. I thought maybe if I played along I could keep it from getting worse. But I was wrong. I saw her face after she read your name on the police alert. She's not backing down, Draven. She's digging in. I set the drive on my server desk and leaned against the counter. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. Instead, I asked, do you know what time the Pavilion uplink purges its nightly logs? He blinked. 11 p.m. Why? I tapped my screen. Because she's going to try to wipe everything from today. I'm going to mirror the uplink node before that happens. Marston stood slowly. He looked older than before. You can end her, he said. No, I replied. The evidence will. He left without another word. And the moment the door closed, I began extracting the sync logs. Clorinda wanted to erase me, but I'd just downloaded her playbook. The Pavilion's uplink node was dumber than I expected. That was Clorinda's first real mistake. She assumed shiny screens and a locked glass cabinet made it secure. But the system still ran on the default firmware issued during Marrow Glen's initial construction grant. And like most mass-deployed HOA hardware, it hadn't been patched in years. At 10:08 p.m., I slipped into the system through a diagnostic echo left behind by a botched printer connection. At 10:11, I mirrored the core server partition. The logs, vote records, device registries, everything Clorinda thought she had overwritten, was still there in the bleed sectors. And at 10:19, I found it. HOA policy revision entry, emergency clause, Menforance D, authored not by the board, not by legal counsel, but by Clorinda Veller herself, with no vote history, no time stamps, no attached discussion threads, just her device ID, a forged committee signature, and a single upload window marked as backfilled. She didn't even run it through board software. She injected it manually through an admin override. I tagged the entry, pulled an encrypted copy, and bundled it with the rest of the mirrored partition. Then, I dropped the entire package into my external node and set the checksum delay. If my main system was ever disabled, the package would launch on 3 public servers and 1 law enforcement recipient. Fail dead switch. Clorinda wasn't just going to lose her seat. She was going to lose the illusion of legitimacy that kept this. Entire HOA balanced on her fingertips. Still, it wasn't enough. Not yet. Because the packet didn't prove intent. It proved forgery. But it didn't show why she targeted me, or what she was planning next. So I checked the Pavilion's outbound email server, where Clorinda stored her drafts. Only one message had been scheduled in advance, to a contact named S.L. Dyer, Family Wellness Adjunct. The subject line chilled me. Second visit with accompaniment. The message was time-stamped for dispatch 3 days from now. It included Oriel's full name, date of birth, and a falsified summary of emotional neglect indicators. She wasn't done. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Clorinda was preparing a second strike, only this time with backup. Probably a third-party child welfare actor or a crisis interventionist. Someone she could pretend had independent authority. She'd build a narrative, submit complaints, manufacture instability, and walk through the front door with two people in uniforms and a clipboard, claiming legal sanction. I stared at the screen, fists clenched. She wanted to erase me without ever touching me again. Let the system swallow me whole. Take Oriel while I drowned in paperwork and court dates. She wasn't reckless. She was methodical. I shut everything down and walked into the nursery. Oriel was still asleep. The mobile above her crib spun in slow arcs, copper glinting in the light of the hallway. It wasn't just a mobile. It was the pulse of the house. Amira mated in her third trimester, shaping each wire bend between contractions. I remembered her voice when she talked about rhythm, how sound could become comfort, how motion could trick a baby's nervous system into peace. It was all I had left of her that still moved. Clorinda had picked the wrong symbol to challenge. She could fake policies, forge votes, twist HOA language into blades, but she couldn't rewrite the truth. And the truth was, I was the only thing standing between Oriel and a system rigged to consume anyone who didn't fit the aesthetic harmony of a controlled neighborhood. That wasn't going to happen, not under my roof. I returned to the office and activated Protocol Blackwire, a full net reroute. All internal pings would now reflect to dummy nodes. Motion alerts would still trip, cameras would still record, but the outside would see nothing. Let Clorinda think I was quiet, compliant. I needed her confident, certain, because the second visit she scheduled, that was the one I was going to let her walk into, on my terms, with the whole world watching. The mobile kept spinning, so did the trap I was setting. Marston showed up again, this time without knocking. He stood just inside my open garage, eyes wide like he was about to bolt. I'd left the door half cracked for a delivery. Didn't expect a panicked HOA secretary to be the one sliding in instead of a package. "She's moving fast," he said. "Clorinda knows the vote record leak came from someone inside. She's already questioned Jeff. She's watching Lydia." "And you?" I asked. "I'm next. I saw her last night in front of my house. She just stood there, staring at my car like she was reading something off it." "She probably was," I said. "License plate tracking. Easy with the new traffic logs the HOA installed." Marston exhaled hard and reached into his pocket. "I brought this," he said, holding out a smaller drive. "It's not a sync this time. It's from the HOA's cloud sync server. She keeps emergency contingencies off-site. This one was harder to access." I took it from him carefully. "You realize the penalty for copying protected HOA infrastructure is nothing," he cut in, "because she never filed the cloud license with the state. She skipped the declaration phase. Her off-site sync is unregistered. That makes it inadmissible in HOA enforcement and legally vulnerable to external audit." I blinked. He gave me a tired smile. "I used to write policy, Draven, before EMT, back when that mattered." I brought him inside, powered up my isolated laptop, and ran the drive through a filtered scanner. The files were organized by initials. One folder read, KM, Gate Violation, Charge, Observation Protocol. Another, RS, Potential Instability, Child Noise Reports. And one more, DK, Digital Security Audit, Infant Privacy. Concerned despite my initials, there were surveillance captures, audio clips, snippets from my front yard, me speaking into my phone, pacing. A line from a conversation I'd had with Oriel asleep in my arms. "If I go down, baby girl, I'll make sure I take the truth with me." Clorinda had labeled it, verbal instability, possible disassociation. "She's making a case," Marston said. "One small line at a time, patchwork psychology." "She's constructing a profile," I replied. "Piece by piece, enough to hand off to a child welfare contractor and let implication do the rest." We fell quiet as the mobile spun in the next room. "I'm in," he said finally. I turned. "I want it on record," he said. "I'm done." "You want a statement?" "I'll give it. Testimony, evidence, anything you need. Just promise me, when this comes down, it comes down clean. No scandal, no broken neighborhood, just truth." I nodded. He gave me one more folder. It contained Clorinda's original board application. Why that mattered, I didn't yet know, but Marston seemed to think it did. Her resume, signature files, declaration of qualifications, and, most importantly, her conflict of interest form. The section where Clorinda claimed she had no familial or financial relationships with any vendors or service providers employed by the Marrow Glen HOA, except one of the contractors she'd used for the fake nurse entry attempt, listed under a third-party holding company. Guess who was on that holding company's LLC registry? Her cousin, Harlan Veller. Clorinda had violated state HOA compliance laws twice, one for non-disclosure of familial interest in service procurement, the other for forging a board-level emergency clause without procedural backing, and that was just what I had now. With Marston on the record and the drive from her cloud server in my hand, I had everything I needed to do what came next. But I didn't want an internal tribunal. I didn't want a quiet vote to remove her. I wanted a reckoning, a public one, in front of every homeowner she's ever bullied, every family she's ever fined for a flower pot or a political bumper sticker, every single person who thought she was untouchable, because they needed to see her fall and know why it happened. Next board meeting's in 3 days, Marston said. Open session, she thinks you won't show. I'll be there, I replied. He paused at the door. She's not going to fold, Draven. I'm not trying to make her fold, I said. I'm setting the table. For what? I looked toward the nursery. The pendulum mobile cast shifting shadows on the far wall. For the truth, I said, and the moment it knocks. I didn't sleep the night before the meeting, not because of nerves, because the clock was ticking and I had too many systems to configure. The files Marston gave me, Clorinda's cloud server cache, the conflict of interest form, the vendor contracts, all of it had to be packaged, authenticated, and pre-verified for chain of custody integrity. If I so much as presented a single corrupted file, Clorinda would twist it as tampering. She'd already prepared a defense. I could see it in how quiet she'd been lately. No public notices, no HOA-wide alerts. She was waiting, coiled in silence, daring me to strike first. Fine. She'd get her wish. By 2 a.m., I had 3 mirrored USB drives, all containing the same compressed evidence package. One was time-stamped, hashed, and uploaded to a public blockchain ledger. The second was handed off to Chief Oren through a pre-arranged signal from our old protocol days. The third was going with me. But I wasn't just bringing digital proof. I was bringing Clorinda's voice. At 3:07 a.m., I accessed the old HOA Pavilion uplink again, not to retrieve data this time, but to review the echo logs. See, Clorinda wasn't careful when she hosted private meetings there. The pavilion was rigged for acoustic dampening, but she always forgot one thing, the mic redundancy channel built into the security kiosk. It didn't delete local test recordings. The file I found was exactly 9 minutes and 44 seconds long, her voice unmistakable. I don't care if he used to be some government watchdog. He's a threat to visual cohesion. He keeps that infant locked in a glowing nursery like some digital mausoleum. Jeff Withrow's voice followed. You said the first nurse didn't make it through. What's plan B? Clorinda again? We document instability, behavioral drift, a few more complaints, 1 or 2 welfare notes, and the state will come to us. Let them do the hard part. It was all there. Malice, strategy, intent. She didn't just violate policy. She weaponized the systems meant to protect people like Oriel. I ran the clip through spectral analysis, cleaned the audio, and time-stamped every speaker. I attached metadata proving it came from a previously inaccessible node and cross-verified the IDs using HOA access patterns. By sunrise, the board meeting packet was done, printed, encoded, prepared for public release. All that remained was baiting the trap. So, I wrote a single sentence on Marrow Glen's public message board. I will be attending the open session and requesting a resident vote for board reassessment based on uncovered violations. I didn't mention Clorinda. Didn't need to. By noon, 17 homeowners had replied. Most neutral, a few skeptical. 3 said, finally. By the time the meeting room filled, I wasn't the only one holding documents. There was a woman from Hollowstream Lane holding a citation about overgrown sentimental landscaping, the roses planted after her husband died. A teenager whose skateboard was confiscated under Clorinda's rolling noise disruption clause. A man in his 60s fined Sheen $200 for painting his shed door the same shade of blue as his house, deemed monochromatic boundary violation. They all came. Clorinda stood at the front of the room like royalty, her gray silk blouse pressed flat, her binder thick with scripts, her lips curved into that perfect, politically smooth smile. The meeting opened. She spoke first. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to remind all attendees that board protocol disallows emotionally charged outbursts or unsupported accusations. Any resident disrupting harmony may be removed by procedural vote." She looked at me when she said it. I didn't blink. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I just placed the USB drive on the table, handed a printed copy to each board member, and calmly said, "I'd like to enter into record evidence of procedural fraud, contract tampering, and unlawful privacy violations committed by this board's president. All data has been independently verified and mirrored." Clorinda laughed, just once, sharp and thin. "Anyone can fabricate." I pressed play. The audio filled the room, her voice, her words, her plan. No one spoke, not for all 9 minutes and 44 seconds. And when it ended, I looked her in the eye and said, "You called my daughter's nursery a mausoleum. That was your mistake. Because now, every parent in this room knew exactly what she really thought of them. And no one was afraid of her anymore." Clorinda didn't speak for a full 10 seconds after the audio ended, but she didn't fall apart either. She lifted her chin, eyes narrowed like she was calculating the temperature of the room. Jeff Withrow, who always backed her, stared at his copy of the evidence without blinking. Lydia looked pale, like she'd swallowed her own tongue. Clorinda tapped her nails against the podium, slow and steady. "That audio is illegally obtained. It's inadmissible under our charter. This entire stunt, it was recorded by HOA-owned surveillance systems during a board-registered session," I cut in. "Your mistake was thinking those systems only worked when you wanted them to." A murmur passed through the crowd. Homeowners leaned forward in their chairs, documents clutched tight, ears straining like they couldn't believe they were finally allowed to hear the truth. She tried again. "This meeting isn't authorized for—" "It is," Marston said from the back row. His voice was loud, surprisingly firm. "Section 9B of our bylaws allows any resident to submit verified procedural violations during open forum. And that," he pointed toward the speaker still glowing red, "is verified. I personally cross-checked the logs. So did a licensed state security contractor." Clorinda whipped around, stunned. She hadn't expected him to break ranks. Marston stepped into the aisle, holding a printed timeline of access logs and meeting edits. "Your cousin's LLC is listed on 3 invoices paid from discretionary funds without board approval. You called it emergency maintenance. It was a front." "Marston," her voice cracked. "You targeted a widower," he said, louder now. "You staged unauthorized entry into his home using a falsified wellness clause. And when that didn't work, you built a psychological profile on him to hand off to child welfare like it was an HOA landscaping report." Silence. No one moved. Lydia finally broke. "I didn't know what that nurse actually was," she muttered. "You told me it was a licensing check. You said he consented." Clorinda opened her mouth, closed it. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked toward Jeff, but he wouldn't meet her eyes either. I stepped forward. "This isn't just about me, or my daughter. This is about what Clorinda Veller turned this board into. A private enforcement regime using fear, misinformation, and technical illiteracy as weapons. She buried votes, faked policies, and manipulated vulnerable residents." I held up the printed violation letter I'd received. She tried to label my grief as instability, turn my security system into a threat. She wrote language into our charter that was never voted on, never ratified, and never legal, and she almost got away with it. A woman 2 rows ahead raised her hand, voice shaky. "Is it true she fined a man for wind chimes?" Another chimed in. "She took my kid's sidewalk chalk, said it was a visual hazard." Marston placed a final folder on the front table. "The motion is clear. Procedural fraud, abuse of authority, and criminal overreach. I recommend immediate removal from office, pending investigation by state HOA regulators." Clorinda looked like a pillar crumbling from within, still standing. But the cracks were loud. She didn't yell, she didn't argue, she just sat down. That was the moment I knew it was over, not because of the evidence or the audio or the documents, but because she had nothing left to say. The vote to remove her passed 17-0. No abstentions. When it ended, the board voted to suspend all discretionary enforcement actions issued in the past 6 months. A review committee was formed. New elections were scheduled. Clorinda didn't stay to watch. She left through the back exit, head low, jacket slung over one arm like a retreating general who'd finally run out of foot soldiers. I waited until the room cleared before I left. Outside, the air was colder than it had been in weeks. Quiet, not the kind of silence that holds tension, but the kind that means something ended. I walked back home with Oriel asleep against my chest. She didn't know what had happened, but when I stepped into our living room and looked up at the mobile spinning above her crib, I knew she'd feel the difference. This house wasn't under siege anymore. It was hers again. The HOA mailbox at the front of Marrow Glen looked different the next morning. Not physically, it was still the same dull brown steel unit welded to the community board post. But the papers inside had changed. Instead of fines and veiled threats folded into thick envelopes, there were handwritten notes, apology letters, and a few copies of old violation notices returned with the word revoked scribbled across them in permanent marker. Someone had even taped a printed screenshot of Clorinda's vote forgery next to the trash bin, bolded and underlined. That wasn't mine. That was the neighborhood finally exhaling. Inside my house, Oriel was quiet, the kind of calm only newborns have when nothing feels wrong in the air. Her cheeks were warm, arms stretched wide in sleep, her fingers twitching occasionally like she was grasping for something unseen. I let her nap a little longer before heading into the office. Not because I needed to gather evidence anymore, but because I needed to shut everything down. The layered traps, the packet flood timers, the ghost relays I'd set up to simulate noise on HOA channels. They'd all served their purpose. The war was over, but I wasn't done. The evidence had already been submitted to state HOA compliance regulators. Orrin confirmed it during our call late last night. Clorinda would be under formal review within days, and several of the financial documents tied to her cousin's LLC had already tripped flags in the contractor payment database. Still, it wasn't just about punishing Clorinda. It never was. It was about what she'd built, and how quietly others let her do it. Marston understood that. He showed up again just before noon, this time carrying a small cardboard box. He set it on my front porch without saying much, and I invited him in before Oriel's next feeding. "I thought about resigning," he said once we were seated, stepping down, walking away from all of it. "But you didn't," I said. "No." He glanced around the room, his eyes catching on the mobile still spinning slow and lazy above Oriel's crib. "Because I think it matters who fills the silence after people like her are gone." He opened the box. Inside were files, actual paper ones this time, containing suggestions from residents, policy corrections, requests for repeals, and a petition. Hand-signed, the header read, "Petition to establish Marrow Glen Resident Oversight Panel. 58 signatures, uncoerced, unprompted. I think they want something better," Marston said, "but they don't know how to build it yet." "They don't have to," I replied. "They just have to stop protecting what's broken." He nodded, then pulled something else from the box, a small metal badge. HOA issued, his. The title secretary engraved along the bottom. He set it on my table. "I'm not resigning," he said again, "but I won't serve in silence anymore." "You won't be the only one," I said. Outside, a few neighbors had gathered at the community green. Not an official event, just some lawn chairs, folded tables, paper plates. A kid was drawing chalk suns on the pavement without being yelled at. Someone brought a speaker. The music was soft, old, probably too slow for anyone under 40, but it was real. I stood at the window and watched. Marston stayed a little longer, long enough to help refill Oriel's formula bottles and ask about the air quality sensor I'd installed in the vent system. He didn't speak like a man under guilt anymore. He spoke like a man remembering what it meant to contribute. By the time he left, the air felt lighter. The next morning, I took Oriel to the front yard. It was the first time since the blackout that I stepped outside without checking every sensor first. I let the sun touch my face, let the breeze catch the edge of the porch swing. I sat there with her in my lap, rocking slow, and stared out at the clean stretch of sidewalk where the mobile ordinance banner used to hang. Gone. In its place, a laminated flyer taped to a lamppost. Community Reset Initiative. Open suggestions. Welcome. There was no logo, no HOA stamp, no signature, just a line in bold, no more silence, no more shadows. And below that, 3 simple words handwritten in blue ink. We saw everything. The state compliance hearing didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in a county administrative building with peeling linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to make your molars ache. Clorinda sat at the far end of the rectangular table, flanked by a tired attorney in a mismatched suit and a clipboard that looked heavier than it should have been. Her hair was tied back, tighter than I'd ever seen it, pulled so hard it looked like a mask. She didn't look angry, she looked exposed. The panel of 3 officials had already reviewed the documentation. They had the audio logs, the video, the cloud backups. Marston's statement had been notarized and submitted. Lydia and Jeff had both filed quiet corrections, an attempt to distance themselves from what Clorinda had done, even if it came too late to matter. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to witness. The lead investigator, a middle-aged man named Crawford, cleared his throat. Ms. Veller, the board has reviewed the digital submission from Mr. Kelm and corroborating evidence from your own internal system backups. We find 3 procedural violations, 2 direct ethics breaches, and 1 documented attempt to fabricate a policy for enforcement use without majority board approval. Do you deny these findings? Clorinda didn't speak. Her attorney leaned forward, whispered something. She finally answered. I acted under discretionary interpretation of board policy in the interest of community safety. Is that a yes or no, ma'am? Her voice barely registered. I don't deny the files. Crawford nodded, clicked his pen, and made a mark on the sheet in front of him. We are recommending immediate removal from your role as HOA president. In addition, your use of private family connections to secure enforcement contracts violates state procurement laws. That matter will be referred to the Attorney General's office for further review. The words fell into the room like cold stone. I didn't flinch. I didn't smirk. This wasn't about revenge. It was about record. Clorinda sat motionless. Her attorney didn't ask to appeal. The hearing adjourned 20 minutes later. No dramatic final words, no shouting, just signatures and silence. When it ended, I stepped into the hallway and called Orrin. He picked up on the second ring. She's out, I said. He didn't ask for clarification. Good. You still have the backup chain? Stored and mirrored, just in case. Thanks. Wasn't for you, he said. It was for Oriel. I hung up and stood in the lobby for a long minute, watching the double doors swing shut behind the last official. It was over. Clorinda would be stripped from every HOA document, every contract, every pamphlet. Her name would vanish from the plaque out front. Her signatures would be voided. The violations she issued would be nullified. But what she'd done would stay, in the memory of every parent she threatened, every elderly neighbor she fined for a wind chime, every teenager she shamed for drawing chalk suns on the sidewalk. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same, but inside those homes, the fear was gone, the control was gone, and something else had begun. Back in Marrow Glen, the new board had already started rewriting the charter. Marston had taken over as interim president, not because he wanted the power, but because no one else wanted to pretend it wasn't personal anymore. We didn't need neutral faces. We needed people who remembered. That night, I stood at the nursery window and watched the pendulum mobile spin in gentle arcs. Oriel's breath was soft and even, her fingers curled around the edge of her blanket, the same way Amira used to hold the hem of her sleeves when she got nervous. She didn't know any of this, but one day she would. And when she asked me why our house had so many cameras, why her nursery had vibration sensors and triple redundant power, I'd tell her the truth, not the scary version, the one with the swing, the mobile, and the day her neighborhood learned what happened when they tried to take something that didn't belong to them. I'd tell her they came for us once, and we never let them come back. The swing creaked gently as I pushed it with my foot. Oriel cradled against my chest. The early morning air still held the edge of spring, crisp and wet with dew, and the smell of cut grass carried through the breeze from the community green. The HOA bulletin board had changed. The maroon laminate sign that once bore Clorinda's name in capitalized gold letters was gone. In its place, a corkboard with thumbtacked flyers, community notes, and a hand-drawn sign from one of the kids down the street that read, "Welcome home, Baby O." I didn't know who left it. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had begun to reclaim itself, not through loud revolts or banners, but through small, stubborn acts of peace. Someone reinstalled the tree swing Clorinda once had removed. The paint on the sidewalk chalk band sign had been scrubbed clean. Porch lights stayed on a little later. Security cameras still blinked, but no longer in fear. Marston dropped by the house just after noon with a folded sheet of paper and a hesitant smile. He didn't knock, just stood outside the porch rail until I noticed him. "The board's voted," he said. "Unanimous. We're dissolving the Preservation Committee label. No more vague authority clauses. No more fake language." I nodded. "And Clause 14D?" "Struck. Formally, we're writing new policy language that requires legal review before any enforcement code is added. Nothing gets buried again." Oriel stirred lightly in my arms. She was growing fast now, eyes more alert, limbs less fragile. "She'll never know what it cost," Marston said softly. "But maybe that's the point." I didn't answer. He handed me the sheet of paper. It was the first page of the revised charter. At the top, above the official seal, one sentence in bold, "No policy shall ever override the sanctity of a home." Beneath it, in clean black ink, the signatures of every remaining board member, including his. I thanked him, not with words, but with a nod that carried more than either of us needed to say. After he left, I sat back on the porch swing and looked out across the street. Clorinda's house still stood, but it had been quiet for weeks. No comings and goings, no HOA mail, no activity. The windows remained shut, the blinds always drawn. Her name hadn't surfaced in the local press, but I knew enough about the Attorney General's office to be patient. Sometimes justice takes its time, but when it arrives, it doesn't knock twice. Inside the house, Oriel's mobile still spun. The copper wires hummed against each other in soft chimes, casting flickering shadows across the ceiling. I'd reinforced the anchor bolt last week, polished each stone. They caught the light differently now, not just as memory, but as proof. Proof that grief could become structure, that fear could become vigilance, that legacy, when protected, could echo through every room of a house, and that HOA abuse, no matter how careful, how procedural, how bureaucratically veiled, could be dismantled. I didn't build this house for war, but when they brought it to my door, I made sure they'd never forget whose door they knocked on. If you've ever had to fight for your child, your home, your peace, subscribe, because these stories aren't over, and I promise you, the next one will hit even harder. Tell me in the comments, what's the next injustice we need to take down?